Hello, everyone. We'll start the webinar in just a moment, working on a few technical details. Colin, are you there?
I am here.
All right. Let's see if I can promote you to panelists. There we go. All right. Yes, there you are. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great, great. Okay, let's go ahead and get started.
Excellent.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar is about helping you, folks who are managing partners and administrators at mid-sized law firms primarily, how to cut through the noise on legal tech. So is your next tech decision going to elevate your firm or send you down a terrible path? For those of you who are members of the Association of Legal Administrators, this webinar is approved for credits as indicated on this slide. If you're a legal administrator and you're not a member of ALA, I really encourage you to take a look at the organization. It's a great community with some terrific knowledge and learning available for legal administrators, including a certificate of legal management, which is kind of top of the industry. So we love ALA. Join. So let me just give you a little bit of a perspective from my point of view about this webinar. So I was a longtime practicing lawyer before I started Lean Law. And I learned some things the hard way while I was doing that. So I went to Stanford Law School. I received absolutely no business education when I did that, even though we were a few hundred yards from one of the best business schools in the world. And I went out and I joined a law firm, and I didn't want to be in one of the huge firms like a lot of people in my class joined. So I joined a mid-sized firm, and they're really nice people. They were great lawyers, but they did not run a great business. And within 2 years, that firm imploded into several pieces, and we went on our separate ways. Uh, a couple years later, I had joined a mid-sized firm, like a large mid-sized firm, 300 lawyers, and I was in a branch office. And the same thing happened again, and it was all about the business practices in that law firm that caused a lot of pain because I was left with no job on a Saturday afternoon and a 6-month-old baby to feed. Now, the good news is that I was really fortunate after that to land in a great mid-sized firm, about a 40-lawyer firm where I practiced for 30 years. And I learned the secrets of how to create a great practice. I had a very successful practice there, and as well as what it takes to run a great firm. And I am, motivated to share what I learned sort of as a legacy and also as part of a business. Now, along the way, I founded Lean Law, which is we call ourselves the financial operating system of a law firm. We do things like timekeeping, billing, trust accounting, and reporting. We're known for a very good integration with QuickBooks in doing those things. And so, along the way, we have met a lot of law firms at Lean Law who both ones that run really well and sort of know the secrets of running a good business, and those that struggle with that. So I want to add that perspective here. Now, so that's plenty about me. Let's talk about our guest today, Colin Levy. Welcome, Colin.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'll just give you a quick introduction and feel free to add anything that you would like to. So Colin is a really amazing legal tech thought leader who has both experience in law firms and in in-house legal departments. He's the author of a book we'll talk about called The Legal Tech Ecosystem. You can find that on Amazon if you want to own that book. I think it's a good reference for anybody who's interested in legal technology. He's really known for some very insightful interviews he's done with top legal innovators. I found those fascinating when I was reading the book. He's an advocate for simplicity and people-first approaches, encourages some safe hands-on experimentation with AI, which we'll talk about. And he's passionate about helping lawyers make sense of technology without having to become tech experts. So again, thanks so much, Colin, for coming today. And if there's anything you'd like to add, go ahead.
Well, thanks again for having me. A pleasure to be here. As I said, yeah, I mean, I think you kind of laid it out pretty well. My real passion is to help make technology, particularly technology in the legal space, accessible, non-intimidating, and helpful. And that's what I have continued to do for a number of years at this point. And it really started with something, Gary, you mentioned earlier, the interviews that I've done of really some top legal leaders. And the goal for those interviews was initially really to help me learn more about the legal tech space, and then it developed into me sharing some of what I was learning with others, because why not help others at the same time that I am helping myself?
Mhm. Love it. Awesome. Well, let's first start with our audience here to understand your firm's tech approach. So I'll pull up the first poll that we've got, which is, so when you've, whoops, I did the wrong one. Excuse me. Let me try a different one. They're always tricky here. They put them in all sorts of strange directions. All right,
Oh,
so
the fun of Zoom.
yeah, exactly. I'm going to end that poll. And I'm going to go back and launch this poll, which is the one I wanted. So which best describes your firm's current tech approach? Are you early adopters, cautious but curious, resistant at all costs? Or are you actively evaluating new tools? Or you're not with a law firm? All right. Give it a little more time. Got a few more people on the call. Don't be shy. All right, we have a couple people who are not participating. Come on now, 10 more seconds. Oh, we've got an early adopter. That's awesome. All right, I'm going to end the poll there and share the results. So we've got some early adopters and cautious but curious folks. All right, so there we go. So thanks for that point of view. It looks like we've got people who are at least tech curious. That'll be, I think that's a really good place to be for what Colin has to offer in here. So where I want to start is with the book. It's called The Legal Tech Ecosystem. And, you know, as you said, that's kind of been the foundation of your insights. So why did you write the book? What were you trying to accomplish?
So I was trying to accomplish a couple of things with the book. One is it occurred to me that a lot of the interviews that I had done prior to writing the book sort of had a number of key themes that underlie the interviews. And I thought that putting those together in a book would help kind of be a way of me taking the work I had already done interviewing folks and make it into a kind of a little bit more of an accessible sort of high level guide to this legal tech world through a thematic approach, and also highlight a number of the folks that I've interviewed through the quotes that I feature in the book, which I think kind of makes the book unique in some ways because it's actually showing you uh, information from folks who've actually been on the front lines and done the work. So that was really kind of the impetus for the book. And the second goal for it really was to provide a kind of a conversational approach to legal tech where the reader feels like they're in some ways listening in on a conversation that I would be having with someone about innovation in legal tech. And I think that really makes the book one that is accessible and engaging to read without being super dense and technical, which often I think can be an impediment to those wanting to learn about technology, whether it's legal tech or just technology more generally.
Yeah, I really like that about it. It was very approachable and conversational. So, and I appreciate that because it's a pretty dense subject otherwise. So, has the book lived up to your expectations? How did you feel like it came out?
I wrote the book, uh, in addition to wanting to share a resource, also I wanted to kind of pursue my passion for writing further. So I feel like in both regards, the book's been successful. It's been better received than I had initially thought. I was nervous about it, considering it was my first book and my first real work of that kind of length.
Hmm.
And I'm really proud of it. I think that it's been a nice accomplishment to have achieved. Um, and to be honest with you, I think also it was an accomplishment I knew I wanted to achieve at some point in my life. I just wasn't necessarily anticipating doing it at this stage of my career where I'm sort of in the middle of my career, I would say. So it's nice to have been able to have gotten done, but also gotten done in a way that makes me feel like I accomplished something and more importantly helped others.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's if you haven't written a book out there, it's a daunting task and takes a lot of time. I can only imagine how long did it take from beginning to end?
It took about 3 years.
Wow.
Partly because it was my first book I'd ever written, partly because I needed to undergo a process of figuring out who's going to help me kind of make it from a messy manuscript into an actual book. And then lastly, figuring out, okay, how do I write this in a way so that it is accessible and interesting, but also doesn't become outdated the minute it's written.
Right.
So all that kind of played into it. And it was just a complete learning process for me because it was
Hmm.
my first book. But overall, like I said, I've been very happy with it. I definitely did not anticipate the amount of work that was required though at all.
Right.
I grossly underestimated that, but I think that's often typical for those who go about writing a book because they think that they can just write out what it is they have in their head and it will just magically become a book, which definitely is not the case.
Exactly. Well, I think it puts you in a pretty unique position. I don't know many people who have talked to as many legal tech leaders as you have in such depth. So when you think about all of those stories that from your interviews, what's one that's especially instructive for our audience today to avoid making a terrible mistake on their technology?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There are a number of folks that I've talked to that I think have been um, interesting in that regard. I think that, you know, one of the more interesting interviews I would say that I think I've done was with the head of Factor. It's a company that does legal process support. And he's just a very thoughtful person. His name is Varumeda, and he's just very a deeply thoughtful person. And I found that that interview, I did it back in 2020, so things have come a long way since then. But what was interesting about it was, he emphasized this point that I have continued to emphasize since then, and it's about culture. It's about building a culture that is supportive
Mm,
of the mission that you're trying to achieve and of the innovation you're trying to do. And that, to me, is critically important, because if you don't have the people in place that are supportive of what it is you're trying to do, it doesn't really matter how much effort you put into trying to do what you're trying to do. It's not going to be what you want it to be because the support just frankly isn't there. And that comes
mhm.
from culture. But culture takes time, it takes effort, it takes dedication, it takes frankly convincing. And so that's really something that comes up in that interview. And he's been someone that I have long followed and deeply respected for that reason. And it's also frankly been a a theme, I would say, that has come up multiple times in other interviews that I've done as well.
Mhm.
And so that's really kind of where I think sort of my passion for this education comes from, is from helping people understand that it really comes down to people more than anything else.
That's really interesting. If I can just share, I mean, the difference between the law firms that I was at early in my career and the one I ended up with, number one by far is culture. And it was a very deliberate culture. It was created very deliberately. Um, it was, a very entrepreneurial culture for a law firm. Like you're responsible to go get your clients and, but you also have a great deal of freedom in doing that. And it had some very interesting consequences kind of downstream. We gave people a lot of agency and expected a lot of agency, but it did two things in particular. One is uh, that it created a culture where people really wanted low overhead. It's like, we don't want to have a lot of costs. And that was different from my other firms where it was kind of like, maybe I could sneak in another half of an assistant into the budget to make my life a little easier. But this firm, everybody had eyes on the overhead, and there was kind of common cause to keep the expenses really low so we all could take more money home. And the other thing was that we had a production-based compensation system. And so, and in that, with that kind of culture, that works really well because you can say, it's like you can work however hard or not hard you want, as long as you cover the nut on your overhead and you'll be paid accordingly. And the way I experienced that was, in my other firms, I was worried about all kinds of other people's stuff. And, oh, how is so and so doing? Are they pulling their weight? How are they being compensated next to me? And what I noticed was suddenly didn't care about that because there was a formula where everybody was compensated. And, I could just worry about myself. And I think that was pretty much true, certainly throughout the partners, but also throughout associates and others in the firm. So, but all that started with culture. It wasn't a great firm technologically, but it was otherwise run as a very tight ship, and that was a result of culture.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it's such an important thing, and it's so often, I think, misunderstood, frankly.
mhm.
Um, I think that there are lots of folks who don't always understand that culture is such a foundational thing that needs to be really done well because of its role as a foundational thing. I mean, if you think about it, if when you're building a house, if the foundation is no good, the rest of the house doesn't matter what it is, it's gonna not be good because the foundation isn't good. Same thing with people and culture at a firm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was, that firm had a very, like, it was very explicit. There was like a 3-page memo or 3 pages of bullets. There were like all the principles that guided the firm.
Mm-hmm.
And it, covered all of the stuff you usually have problems with in law firms and just really, made people responsible in a way that was very healthy, I thought. So yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. So what's the most surprising thing that you learned in writing your book? What knocked
Uh,
you on your seat, out of your
yeah, I
seat?
think there's a couple things that really kind of uh surprised me. One about the actual writing process itself was that I had to keep reminding myself that was writing this book to help others. And so with respect to editorial changes to the book, I needed to be open minded to some of those to ensure that others would find the book helpful. And what that meant was kind of changing my mindset a little bit in terms of, well, I wouldn't necessarily think about it in this way, but someone reading this book likely would benefit from it being put this way. So that's what I need to do in terms of putting it together.
Hmm.
Um, and then in terms of kind of the themes and concepts I talk about in the book, I think that, one of them, in addition to the culture item that we've already talked about, was just the fact that, um, we have to meet people where they are, meaning that you can't just foist an idea upon someone. You have to kind of get them to buy into the idea. And that's something that came up a lot in the book, came up a lot in conversations I've had when I was writing the book, and continues to come up. And I don't mean that when I say by meet people where they are, I don't mean kind of just accommodating them and giving into whatever they want to do. It more is a matter of listening first, understanding where they're coming from, and taking what you hear to frame the idea you want to propose in ways that the person will understand and they can resonate with. That's
Hmm.
something that I think is super important, uh, because I think too often in the legal tech space, and I've called this out myself, is in our abundance of excitement to try to push people to change. We don't kind of let people change on their own and give people space to do that. We want them to change on our terms, and that just doesn't work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have a couple questions about that just down the road in a second, but I think that is the I think the difficulty of creating change in law firms is something that I've found really remarkable and surprising. That's just me. I shouldn't be surprised, but it certainly is a huge part of the whole legal tech landscape, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, what else would you like us to know about the book?
So I think the other thing I would mention about the book is that, um, it was written before uh AI was a real thing. It does touch upon AI,
Mm. Hmm.
but I say that not as a means of saying, don't buy the book because it's not about AI, but more a matter of, I think that the book provides you with a lot of information that helps you kind of set the stage for what exists now, meaning that the concepts and ideas that are mentioned in the book are those that will help you get yourself on the right path going forward as you continue to explore technology and explore this age of AI that now has been thrust upon us. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think that's something important to keep in mind, is that, there's a lot of technology that has existed for some time before AI, and AI has not replace those technologies. It may have enhanced those technologies and augmented them, but it hasn't replaced them.
Right, exactly. Well, and stay tuned on AI because that's changing so rapidly. It's certainly making my head spin. All right. Let's see here. So I want to discuss a sort of a fundamental frustration I have with the business of law and legal tech. And you touched on it a second ago, which it's pretty easy to describe what firms need to do to become more profitable and more efficient technologically, but it's really hard to get law firms to change, no matter how big the benefit is. So your book recounts that, lawyers like to roll their eyes at tech, and I've certainly seen that plenty of times in my career. And what we see is lawyers are so busy practicing law, which is what they like to do and what they want to do. And the admins in firms are so busy chasing cats all day because they have a whole bunch of roles in many cases that that makes it really difficult to implement the change needed. I also think law firms have been burned by bad tech changes. Um, I know my firm has experienced that, and they aren't trained how to implement change. So my question to you is, why is it so hard? So I've heard that change in a law firm is analogized to losing weight or giving up smoking. Um, but it's not like you're asking somebody to stop eating pie, or to go to cold turkey on a nicotine addiction. So what makes it so hard?
I think what's hard about it is two things. One, that time. Uh, Law firms are built around time. Time spent doing things, time allocated for certain things, time billed for certain things. And I think because of that, anything that requires you to take time away from something that you're incentivized to do or not do, to do something else can be very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So that can come in many different forms. It can come in the form of the billable hour model, which incentivize inefficiency in some ways.
Yep.
It can come in the form of you're so busy you don't want to take time away from doing work to do something that could actually help you do more work in less time. Um, so that I think is a big challenge. And I think the way you kind of approach that challenge is rather than saying, oh, well, you just should do this or you shouldn't do that, is more a matter of showing, well, if you took, 5, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever, to do this or to change this, then this could result in X number of hours being more productive for you, or you being able to take on more clients, or you building your revenue more. I think the way to approach that challenge is through metrics and data and show that there are ways to do things that will allow you to still work within the context of how you work currently, but actually
Mm-hmm.
allow you to be more successful and
Interesting.
allow you to be seen as being more valuable to those you're helping, whether it's you're reporting to a partner or whether it's a client you're working with or both.
Very interesting. So is there is that the Ozempic for law firm profitability?
Well,
Persuasion? It's a
look, I think that as someone who actually has lost weight, you have to kind of, I think, understand that it's not going to be a straight line
hmm
down. Meaning, you're not going to automatically lose weight and keep it off at consistently. Um, and yeah, you can take Ozempic or whatever, but there are no real quick fixes. Even with the Ozempic, it's not a quick fix per se and comes with some impact. So I think that you have to approach it from this place of, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm actually going to really dedicate myself to doing it to see it through. Meaning
hmm
that even if I go about it and there's a point at which something doesn't flow as nicely as I would have liked, or doesn't happen as nicely as we'd like, just accept that as part of the process.
Right. Hmm.
Which goes to something I think that lawyers in general have to be more comfortable with, which is frankly failing, and
Mm.
understanding that things are not always going to be successful, or success may not necessarily come in the form that they're expecting it to come in, as well. So that I think is part of it as well.
Very interesting. Yeah. So let me ask you about law firm financial performance specifically. So in an hour, I can show an average law firm techniques that would triple their profitability. So when I ask in a webinar like this, how many have achieved what I call that best in class performance, I usually get 20 to 25% who say yes. But when I dive into it, virtually every one of them started with best in class practices. They didn't change from, something old to something new. So it seems like a lot of these firms may need to just crash and burn and break into pieces like some of the firms I would have been with to start over and improve their profitability. So do you agree with that assessment, or can somebody can there be a real change from a firm that is not doing very well financially?
Yes, I think there can be, but it requires you to just be honest with yourself and with the firm, and accept the fact that, okay, if things aren't successful, accept that, you know, and by accepting, I don't mean be happy with it. What I mean by is accept it and figure out, okay, what is working and what isn't working, and are there ways to improve um what isn't working.
Hmm.
And that means kind of looking at everything. And I think that that's how you kind of have to go about it. Now, does that mean that perhaps there are some firms that just, the model just isn't working, and you really should just kind of give up on it? Maybe. But I think you have to do a deep dive and really figure out look at the data first before you go from there. Um, because you can't just assume that just because you're not doing well, that means that you should just give up.
Hmm. So if you're talking about lawyers and legal admins with limited time, what's one thing they could do to get started on that process?
So I think one thing they can do to get started that process is do an accounting. Look at the accounting statement, look at the profit and loss statement, look at the balance sheet, figure out where there is leakage, where there are issues, and then dive into those areas. Figure out why. Is it
Hmm.
you're not attracting enough clients? You are not working productively in some way. You're spending too much time on things that aren't making you money or bringing in revenue. Or, are there expenses that aren't necessarily necessary at this point to have? Or are there expenses that you need, but you're paying too much for them, meaning you don't necessarily need everything you're getting because you're just not using some functionality. So
Hmm.
there are a number of different factors to look at. I am definitely not a financial, law firm financial expert here, but I just think that generally speaking, those would be things I would be looking at. And that means, looking at the tools you use as part of that. Sometimes these tools may be helpful, sometimes they may not be. Um, I think that's an important part of kind of what you look at overall
Right.
uh, when you're evaluating things.
So I want to put the audience on the spot a little bit here and just ask if, what's the biggest frustration any of you have faced when trying to roll out new technology or implement some other big change? And just go ahead and type in the chat if you've got something to share there. Don't be shy.
I would say while people are kind of thinking about commenting that there's just a lot of look, it's a challenge, operating a law firm, operating any type of business is challenging, especially in an unpredictable environment. So I think there has to be some degree of um willingness to be vulnerable and willingness to kind of accept um your successes as well as your uh failures, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. It is, law firms don't like to fail. Um,
Well, yeah, I
yeah.
mean, failure is just something that often is just not really, frankly, when it's just not really talked about as a positive thing in law school, and that's a problem, I think, because it's, you're taught to think that, you can't fail.
Mm-hmm.
Failure just isn't an option, which I think is problematic on many levels.
Right. Right. Well, and now that I've been in other kinds of businesses, it's amazing how much failure there is, but also learning with every bit of that. So I think you can, if you're willing to fail, you can proceed a lot faster. Okay, I'm not
Right.
getting any bites from the audience here, so I'm going to move to the next question, which is about fostering technology in law firms. So, it's easy to get uh, stuck in the shiny object system when you're looking at legal technology, either like a single feature in a product or something new that looks cool. So how do you avoid that if when the world is obsessed with features and integrations?
I think to avoid that, it starts with understanding what exactly are you looking for and why. What it is, basically, what is the problem you're trying to solve for? The more you understand the problem you're trying to solve, the better off you'll be in terms of finding a solution to that problem. The challenge is that oftentimes there's so much noise going on out there that it's very easy to fall into the trap of, you know, being seduced by technology, when in fact, just because the technology exists doesn't mean it's going to be the right one for you. Even if your friend is using a certain piece of technology, your friend's circumstances may differ wildly from those of your own. So that's something to keep in mind as well. That's not to say you shouldn't, give your friend suggestions some thought for sure, but you know, don't just rely on the friend's suggestion. Because
Hmm.
otherwise you fall into the trap of, thinking, oh, well, this great friend, they're really good at this. Maybe, I'm going to have them do this, even though they haven't told me anything about them being really good at this other thing.
Right.
You don't, it's like hiring a friend who's, good at construction. That doesn't mean they're going to be a good electrician. So, there's that to keep in mind as well.
Hmm.
I think the other thing as well to kind of have in your head as you're looking at technology is figuring out, will this be something I will want to use? Does it seem like something I'm gonna be happy to use? Does it feel like something that I could envision myself using? And or is it something that I and my team could envision using? Oftentimes the decision maker for making a purchase isn't necessarily the only one who's going to be using that tool that's being considered, which is why it's important to bring other users into the demo and into the evaluation process to ensure that whatever it is you're looking at is going to be something that's going to be used by all those who are involved.
Right. Yeah. What we run into a lot is that people, that especially with like the practice management platforms, there's some feature on there that's just great and is a big attraction. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't necessarily, that kind of comes with it that
Mm-hmm.
is not very useful and can even be a hindrance if you're
Right.
trying to do other things. Yeah. So now, which takes me to another point that you make in the book that I thought was very insightful, which is to, explore your existing tools and see what they can do for you. And one I think that many people underestimate is Microsoft 365. So what's a quick win a mid-sized firm can, overlook with a tool that they already own?
Well, I think that, Microsoft 365 already includes Microsoft Copilot, which is a form of generative AI. I think
Hmm.
there are some things you can do with it that can help you, such as reviewing some language or researching something or making a suggestion about something to do it better. So that's sort of a quick win. A non-AI thing you can do is oftentimes your subscription to Microsoft Office 365 includes something called Power Automate, which is a
Hmm.
very easy tool that allows you to very quickly automate processes that otherwise will be time consuming without having to do any real coding or anything. It's pretty basic and easy to use for anyone. Um, and another tool that also is often part of the subscription package for Microsoft Office 365 is something called Power BI, which is Power
Hmm.
Business Intelligence, really, which is a visual data visualization tool, and that can be very useful for helping your data tell a story in a very visual, compelling way without having to do a whole lot of work, in order to see, what type of work, how work is being done, costs associated with that work, perhaps who's doing the most amount of work, whatever. There are a variety of different things you can do with that tool as well. So, I think oftentimes people forget that the tools they already have additional functionality they just perhaps aren't aware of
Hmm.
or don't know about, um, and therefore don't use.
Yeah, I would say this about Microsoft 365 is it's like a rocket ship that will do just about anything, but it comes unassembled in a box with no instructions and about 12 different ways you can put things together. So you definitely want a guide who can help you figure that out. And but it's very powerful and is a really good gap filler for the tech stacks that a lot of mid-sized firms have.
Right. I completely agree with you about that.
Yeah. All right, I think I might have messed up this poll, but let's give it a try. Just talk about our audience's experience here. So, yeah, I can't restart this poll, but I will share the results. So this is just a question about what's been the cost of tech decisions for your firm. And the answer we got was the one person who had time to answer said it was significant. And I would share that it's pretty hard to, uh, you know, touch much of your tech stack without it being a pretty significant investment and can create some pretty significant problems as well as benefits, depending on what you're doing. Any thoughts on this one, Colin?
Yeah, I think that I just completely lost my train of thought. My apologies. Can you repeat the question and I will try
Well,
again?
yeah, I just wanted to, when you think about law firms implementing tech decisions, I just think the stakes can be pretty high.
They can be,
Because,
yes.
yeah. So, just wondering, what your experience is along those lines. And, you know, how should law firms think about that decision to go ahead and change something out in their tech stack?
So I think you really want to be very intentional and thoughtful about that, meaning that if you find it that you have a tool in your tech stack that you want to replace, figure out the why. Is it because no one's using the tool? Is it because it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing? Is it because it's not doesn't communicate well or play well with the other tools in your tech stack? Is it a number of those things? You really want to better understand the why before you go about evaluating a new tool, or even if you need to use a new tool, because oftentimes what may happen is you have a tool And the reason why it's being used is because either no one knows about it, or it's something that just isn't fitting into the existing tech stack, and that may require some tweaking of it, or perhaps it's been configured incorrectly, or what have you. So the more you can kind of dive into figuring out why the tool doesn't work, excuse me, um, the more you better the better off you'll be, excuse me, if you the better off you'll be in figuring out whether you need to actually replace that tool or not. Um, because I think too often you may feel compelled to just so-called throw something out just because it's not working the way you think it should work. But does that
Hmm.
mean that it's not actually working the way it's intended to work? Or because you just didn't do enough due diligence to figure out how it does actually work for you, or it just actually isn't the right tool for you?
Right, right. Exactly. That's a great point. So I just wanted to insert this here, which is our law firm report card. We've had a lot of firms who found this to be really helpful, just to sort of assess where they are financially, and then that you can put that in the context of what you need technologically. So this just pulls out some basic numbers from your law firm. Um, the utilization, uh, utilization, realization, collection, overhead percentage, a few basics. I call them the warning lights for your firm. So you can understand where you benchmark relative to other firms and some things you might be able to do about them. That's what these areas are here to talk about solutions and what they save for you. But like I say, a lot of people have found this to be a useful tool. You'll get a link to download it after the webinar, and I'll talk a little bit more about how to use that later on, but I just wanted to flag it a little bit there. So let's talk about what I thought was a really great insight from you and from Nir Golan. I hope I said that name right, which is that you address people and process before technology. And I think you put it in terms of no new golf clubs with your technology. So what is, tell us more about what this means and how to apply it in a mid-sized law firm.
Yeah, so, really what it means is that you want to ensure that you are making the most of your existing tools. And that means, requiring, sometimes, undergoing sort of an education process in terms of re-educating yourself and perhaps others about how the tools you already have work, how they could work better. Because, with a golf club, um, I've learned this a few times I play golf. I don't particularly like golf, but it is a useful analogy here. Um, a golf club, if you don't know how to play golf, you can buy the most expensive, best golf club in the world. It's still not going to make you a better golfer if you don't know how to actually play golf, as understand the basics of playing golf to begin with. So accordingly, if you don't know how to use a tool you already have, well, a new tool is not going to make a bit of difference necessarily, because it may just make things harder for you, because now you have two tools instead of one that you have to learn how to use. So I really do think that it's important to constantly be adapting in terms of how to better make use of your existing tools, which often get improved over time before you start turning to new ones.
Hmm.
For example, my dad, going back to golf, he plays a lot of golf. He's a good golfer. He just got a new set of clubs, but he had existing clubs for quite some time that he just, learned how to use better and better, but he reached a point where they just weren't doing anything further for him.
Hmm.
And so he got a new set of clubs, and that's made a bit of difference. But that's because he's reached the point where they're just no longer being helpful for you
Yeah,
because you've
yeah.
outgrown them. And you
Right,
have to understand the difference between outgrowing a tool versus just not understanding how to use the tool effectively.
right. The player matters more than the club, which
Right,
th-
right,
totally applies to people in law firms. You can have the best
exactly,
tools in the world and still have plenty of lawyers who won't use them.
right.
Yeah, exactly. So just to flesh this out a little bit, your book speaks of a actionable three-step roadmap for tech adoption. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, it basically kind of revolves around what something that we've already kind of talked about, which is that you want to have the culture in place, you want to have the people in place, you want to have that foundation in place and secured and properly laid out. And then you want to evaluate your existing processes and see whether how they're working, if they're broken, where are the pain points, and figure out why those pain points occur. Is it because your people are doing something they shouldn't be doing? They're not following a certain process. They don't want to follow a certain process for some reason, or the process just doesn't fit how something needs to get done. And then using those two kind of lines of inquiry, then to determine whether it makes sense to look at a tool or to engage in some form of innovation, because you need to kind of really understand where you are and where you want to go before you start moving towards where it is you want to go. Because if you
Hmm.
start just moving away from where you are on the sole basis of you don't like where you are currently, but not really understanding exactly it is where you want to end up, you could end up anywhere because there's all sorts of paths you can take. And they may get you there in some form or fashion. They may not. They may get you somewhere else you don't really want to be. So you really have to kind of do that people and process work first before you engage in the so-called kind of more fun stuff of
Right.
evaluating and looking at tech tools.
There were a couple of points you made in the book that I thought were really great. One is to appoint a tech champion who is not the IT person,
Right.
but somebody who, is really bought in and can, lead that process. And the second thing is to pilot a small, high impact change.
Hmm.
And I think that's so important because, if you do 10 different things and six of them fail, there's going to be a lot more resistance to the next one that you do. So having a win,
That's exactly right.
yeah.
You don't want shelfware. You really want to make sure that if you invest in a tool, it's the right one, which is why I emphasize the people and process elements.
So we've just got a few more minutes left. I'm going to move to the next slide and we'll have a brief conversation about AI. So, we're all kind of in experimental mode with AI now. So how can mid-sized firms experiment safely, without getting themselves in trouble or, falling for the hype of all of this?
Yeah, so it starts with, I think, kind of doing things in I would say a sort of secure, safe way, meaning, look at something that's not confidential, that's kind of just a run-of-the-mill thing. Could be reviewing a block of text, it could be looking at some standard document that doesn't have confidential information in it. It could be, just organizing a bunch of files that are just, you've had filed away, but you just want to learn how AI can actually do that before turning it to more sensitive matters.
Hmm.
And engaging with an AI tool to try to do some of those things. And also keep in mind that there are a variety of different types of tools you can play around with. There's not just not just one tool. There's Claude,
Right.
of course, there's ChatGPT, there's Google Gemini, but there also are other tools like Vincent AI from VLex. There is a whole bunch Lexis AI. Clear Brief, which allows you to help kind of automate and research briefs with appropriate case law. There are a lot of different tools that you can play around with that many of which have been trained on actual legal data, which perhaps can give you a little sense of
Hmm.
security, but you can also just play around with freely available tools in the ways that I mentioned already so that you can just learn how they operate, learn how they work, learn how they're going to provide you with information, learn how they're going to respond to inquiries that you present to it.
Yeah. I think the thing that has uh, that I keep coming back to is how important, how iterative a process it can be with AI. I mean, if you have a simple generic prompt, you're probably going to get a simple generic answer,
Right.
but you can almost always dive deeper into that and get more of an, agentic view, to use the word of the day, of how it can correct itself and get smarter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I do all the time, which is incredibly helpful, is instead of trying to figure out exactly what my prompt is going to be, i.e., what the question or the input I provide to one of these tools, as I just ask the tool itself to come up with a prompt for what it is I'm trying to accomplish and apply that prompt. And usually it gives me 90% of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And then you can ask it to critique your prompt and how to make it better, and it will give you
Right. And
another
it's going to
round.
iterate and it's going to make it better for you. So
Yeah,
absolutely. Look, I'm always seeking ways to do things better and more effectively. And so, you know, as much as I would love to learn how to write the perfect prompt, sometimes why bother with that when just have the AI write the prompt for me instead, when it's going to know itself how to write the prompt so that it achieves what I'm looking for? Because the other thing to keep in mind with these tools is, for better or for worse, they're kind of people pleasers who are trying to always give you what you want.
right.
So you can help it give you what you want better by asking it to do things to get you there better.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I'm going to maybe skip over a couple of things here. Um, so just to kind of recap things from today, I heard a few things I thought were really interesting. It's sort of I like the idea with tech of sort of starting small and getting a win, and but doing that in the context of a larger strategy. I think that makes a lot of sense. I really love this idea that people and process drive your success with AI and with technology. I like I think it's critical that people learn safe and smart ways to experiment with AI. You do not want to be left behind on
Right.
this change. And then, so Colin, what's your final word for law firms that want to improve their technology?
I think for law firms that want to improve their technology, it starts with just experimenting, just going forth and just going, just seeing what's out there and learning. I
Hmm.
think that, the best way to kind of, eh, you know, build a lasting relationship with technology is to learn about it and learn as much as you can about it and always be learning. That's I think how I've adapted over time, and I think that's how plenty of others have adapted as well. It's just always be learning.
Yeah, especially right now. I mean, things are changing so fast. You've really got to be light on your feet and ready to learn.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have one more poll that I'm going to launch here about whether folks would like a tech readiness consult after the webinar. I think we lost a few of our audience members, but give you a few more seconds to address that if you'd like to. All right, I'm going to end that poll and we'll finish up. So just so everybody knows, when you're going to get an email after the webinar. It'll allow you to review the slides and the recording. You can download the financial report card and send it back, and we will we will send you a free profitability report that's actually quite detailed and helpful. And have the opportunity to book a free consult with me about both either your tech strategy or your financial strategy. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. We want to help. We want to get your firm on a good path. We look forward to talking with you folks in the future. All right. Any last questions? I don't see any in the chat here. Colin, would you like a final word?
Final word is, if I can ever be of help to you in the future, please feel free to connect with me either on LinkedIn, via my website, colinslevy.com. And feel free to check out my book on Amazon, The Legal Tech Ecosystem. Gary, thanks again for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Colin. And the webinar is adjourned.
Thanks very much. I have to run to my next meeting now.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.